These are tales from urban nightmares, where bustling streets and bright lights hide the darkest shadows. Each story explores an unsettling side of city life, where terror lurks in unexpected places. Each story is designed to keep the listener hooked, with well-timed pauses to let the suspense linger. In 2017, Emily, a 26-year-old graphic designer, moved to New York City for her dream job. Late nights at the office became routine, and she often took the subway home. One Thursday night, she boarded the last train on Line 7, heading to Queens. The train was unusually empty, with only a few passengers scattered in different cars. Emily took a seat near the door and plugged in her headphones. As the train sped through the dark tunnels, she noticed something odd. The stations they passed weren't the usual ones. Instead of familiar names like Grand Central or Times Square, the signs were blank. At first, she thought she had taken the wrong train, but the route matched the map. The other passengers didn't seem to notice or care, staring blankly ahead. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the train came to a screeching halt. Emily removed her headphones, her pulse quickening. A crackling voice over the intercom said, "End of the line. All passengers must exit." But when she looked out the window, the platform was dark and abandoned. The other passengers stood up in unison and walked out without hesitation. Against her better judgment, Emily followed them, clutching her bag tightly. As she stepped onto the platform, the train doors closed behind her and sped away. She found herself in a massive underground station that didn't resemble anything she'd seen before. The walls were covered in graffiti, and the air was damp and cold. The other passengers walked into the darkness, disappearing one by one. Emily called out, but no one responded. Panic set in as she realized her phone had no signal. She decided to follow the dimly lit signs pointing to an exit, hoping to find her way out. But the further she walked, the more disoriented she became. The same graffiti-covered walls seemed to repeat endlessly, as if she were walking in circles. Just as she was about to give up, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw a man in a conductor's uniform. "Lost, are we?" he said with a grin that didn't reach his cold, hollow eyes. He gestured for her to follow him, and though every instinct told her not to, she felt she had no choice. He led her to a rusty staircase, saying, "This is your stop." Emily climbed the stairs and found herself in an alley near her apartment building. When she turned to thank him, the man was gone, and the staircase had disappeared. She never took the subway at night again. The moral of her story: the city never sleeps, but some of its secrets are better left undisturbed. In 2019, David moved to a new city for work and rented a cheap apartment downtown. It was an old building, with creaky floors and narrow hallways, but it suited his budget. The only odd thing about the place was the red door at the end of the hallway on the 5th floor. The landlord had told him, "That apartment is sealed. Don't worry about it." David found the explanation strange but didn't press further. Late one night, David heard faint knocking coming from the direction of the red door. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was just an old building making noises. But the knocking grew louder and more insistent, echoing through the empty hallway. Curiosity got the better of him, and he stepped out of his apartment to investigate. As he approached the red door, the knocking abruptly stopped. He pressed his ear against the door and thought he heard whispering. It sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison, but he couldn't make out the words. Uneasy, he returned to his apartment and locked the door, telling himself it was just his imagination. The next morning, he asked a neighbor about the red door. The old man shook his head and said, "That door's been locked for years. Don't mess with it." That night, David was woken by a loud banging sound. It was coming from the red door again, but this time, it was accompanied by a low, guttural growl. He tried calling the landlord, but there was no answer. Summoning his courage, he decided to record the sounds with his phone. When he played back the recording, his blood ran cold. The growling had turned into a voice whispering his name. Panicked, David decided to leave the apartment and spend the night at a friend's place. As he walked past the red door, it creaked open slightly, revealing total darkness inside. A cold breeze swept through the hallway, carrying the faint smell of decay. He didn't wait to see what was inside and ran out of the building. The next day, he moved out and never looked back. Months later, he learned that the Red Door apartment had been the site of a gruesome murder decades ago. The moral of his story? Some doors should remain closed, no matter how curious you are. In 2021, Rachel, a junior executive, got a promotion and was given an office on the 20th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The building was modern and sleek, with glass walls offering stunning views of the city. At first, Rachel loved her new office, often staying late to enjoy the quiet and the view. But she soon began noticing strange things happening after dark. Her computer would turn on by itself, displaying static on the screen. She dismissed it as a glitch, but then she started hearing faint tapping on the glass walls. The first time it happened, she thought it was just the wind. But one night, as she stayed late to finish a report, the tapping became louder and more deliberate. When she looked up, she saw a dark figure standing outside the window. Her office was 20 stories up, there was no balcony and no ledge. Terrified, she turned off the lights, hoping the figure would go away. When she looked again, it was gone. The next day, she mentioned the incident to a coworker, who looked at her with a mixture of fear and pity. "You're not the first to see it," he said. "This building has a history." He told her about a construction worker who had fallen to his death while the skyscraper was being built. That night, Rachel stayed late again, determined to prove to herself that it was all in her head. As the clock struck midnight, the tapping returned, louder than ever. This time, the dark figure appeared inside her office, standing in the corner. It had no face, just a shifting mass of shadows where its features should have been. Paralyzed with fear, Rachel watched as it slowly moved closer. Suddenly, the building's fire alarm went off, and the figure vanished. Rachel fled the office and never worked late again. The moral of her story? In the heart of the city, some spirits refuse to rest. Cities are alive, not just with people, but with stories, secrets, and sometimes, spirits. These tales remind us that no matter how bright the lights are, darkness is always lurking. Stay cautious, because the urban jungle can be just as terrifying as the wilderness.